Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Collective Design, where this afternoon we've got a fascinating conversation for you. I'm Cheryl Durst. I'm the Executive Vice President and CEO of IIDA, the International Interior Design Association. And thank you for allowing us into your homes this afternoon for this third iteration of our Collective Design webinar series. This afternoon, we are tackling an interesting challenge, interesting moment. We all know that this pandemic has changed the way we live and changed the way we work. It has also had profound and lasting effect on how we both learn and how we are educated. And so this afternoon, we have a stellar panel that will be led, moderated by my esteemed colleague from IIDA headquarters, Ryan Ben, who his official title is Student Engagement and Advancement Manager, but he is the guru of all things student at IIDA. And so it's my pleasure and my privilege to turn this over to Ryan to start the panel and introduce our special guests and panelists this afternoon. Ryan?
Thank you so much, Cheryl. I really appreciate that very kind introduction. Means a lot to me, so thank you as always. Really excited to have everybody who's here with us today. I really appreciate you taking the time out of your very busy schedule to tune in with us. We've got an amazing panel here today. I'm going to have the panelists in a moment introduce themselves, but before we do that, I just wanted to give you a few housekeeping bits of business just so we could level set and all be on the same page. This is worth a continuing education unit. The information for the IDCEC CEU is available here on your screen, and we'll also be sending that information out when we save and record the panel afterwards. We are recording today's hour-long discussion, so it will be available to watch at a later point. So don't feel like if you miss it or you have to leave, we've got your back. We'll have this available for you at another time. In that same vein, many of you took the time to send us questions in advance when you registered, and I am so thankful for those questions. We've adopted some of them for our conversation today. There were so many that we might not get to all of them. So if you have additional questions or anything like that, you can contact me directly at rben@iida.org. You can always reach out to me at headquarters. I'm happy to be your resource for anything that you might need. You also have an opportunity to ask questions throughout the panel using the Q&A and the chat function in Zoom. Feel free to do that. We've got a couple of folks here on our end who are going to do their best to corral those questions, send them to me so I can kind of filter them to our panelists as the program goes on. We might, again, not get to all of them, but we've got some ideas for how we can get more answers out after the webinar, so stay tuned for more information. I think that about does it for me before we get to this panelist. So I'm going to have the four of them introduce themselves now. Rebekah, I'll start with you.
Great. Thank you, Ryan. I'm Rebekah Matheny. It's a pleasure to be here with you. I'm an assistant professor at The Ohio State University in the Department of Design, and I teach in the area of interior design. I'm currently teaching this semester a collaborative studio, which includes our interior design, visual communication, and product design students geared towards sustainability in retail and consumer culture. And I'm also teaching a technical course on materials and methods.
Awesome. Thanks, Rebekah. John?
Hi, John Otis. I'm a professor of interior design at Pratt Institute in Brooklyn. I'm also a principal of Object Agency, a small multidisciplinary design studio. And I'm a vice president on the IIDA International Board of Directors. And I'm teaching currently as well, a graduate design studio, as well as a course called Cinematic Space, which is mixes film and theory and applies it to interior design.
Awesome. Thank you so much, John. Tyler.
Hi, I'm Tyler Hatton. I'm a graduating senior at The Ohio State University, and I'm also the senior campus co-leader there.
Awesome. Thanks, Tyler. And Meghan?
Hi, I'm Meghan Webster, one of the principals at Gensler and their global education practice leader. I have a counterpart in our LA office, and I am based in Chicago.
Awesome. Thank you all so much for doing this with us. I really appreciate it. We can't do this kind of programming without the support of expertise like all of you. So thank you, thank you, thank you. First and foremost, I just want to do a quick check-in with this call, just see how everybody's doing, what you're working on right now, kind of how you're coping. So Meghan, what is happening in your world right now?
Yeah, thanks, Ryan. I think as we've all kind of mentioned, I mean, with this experience, I think perspective has been everything. And I think we've all witnessed how transformational our lives have become over the last few weeks. I will say on a personal level, I'm a parent of 2 small children, and it's been actually pretty illuminating to see how much more adaptive kids are than adults. I think they're sort of like loving this. And I think it's also, I mean, having, kind of been in the realm of education, I think it's bringing up all these questions for me around, we talk a lot about experiential learning and project-based learning and really bringing that into the classroom. And in a way, we have an opportunity to do that at home now. And I think it's a really interesting paradox that has just been top of mind for me.
That's perfect. Thank you so much for sharing that. Tyler, how are you?
I'm good. Good. Just settled down at home. All classes and studios are virtual now, so just living in a virtual world.
Yeah, that's great. Good to hear. John, how are you in New York?
Good. It's been strange, for sure. Fortunate that I'm staying in our weekend home where there's plenty of space and surrounded by nature, and you can take walks and stuff like that. So that's been kind of a nice break from all of this, and still wanting to get back to regular kind of program of some sort. I think that it's probably been a shock to our systems, our collective systems, and we're just trying to adapt and move forward as we can, obviously with teaching and working on some projects, those that have not been put on hold. We're doing well. I can't complain. A lot of people can complain a lot.
Glad to hear it. Rebekah, how are you in Ohio?
Yeah, same as everybody else. I just spent all morning and basically up until this call on back-to-back Zoom calls. We're doing virtual desk crits. So, it's call after call. But I think at the same time, it's like John said, it's getting back to a routine and having that touch base, having that interaction with the students provides them a sense of normalcy, and myself a sense of normalcy too, and motivation, which is much needed. I think we're all struggling with motivation, and I'm isolated in my apartment. I'm jealous. I wish I had a puppy like Cheryl just got. So, I'm talking to my imaginary cat from time to time, that kind of thing. So it's helpful being able to interact with the students and kind of get a sense of routine and get that established. But overall, very fortunate, like everybody here, that we're able to stay at home, stay healthy, stay safe, and we have that privilege to do so.
That's great to hear. Thank you all very, very much. I appreciate it. I think one of the things that's really top of mind right now for me, we're getting into about a month here in Chicago of this transition. And I feel like that's afforded us an opportunity right now to think really critically about priorities. And so I kind of want to hear from the 4 of you, what are your priorities right now, knowing that we can't do everything we used to be able to do? For each of you, how are you prioritizing what's most important for you as an educator, a student, or a designer? Tyler, I'll start with you.
I would say for the most part, like my priorities are the same, but maybe like first and second swapped places. So like normally I would say that like school and studio work is like the #1 priority in my life because we're so close to graduation. And so, the goal is having great projects that you can put in your portfolio and, share with people. And then usually I have like the second priority of like mental health and like physical fitness and things like that. But I feel like now, because of everything that's going on, I have shifted those and I've really made like mental health and like being outdoors and being active like the first priority.
That's really interesting to hear. That's excellent. John, I feel like you kind of alluded to that when we asked you how you were doing. How are your priorities changing right now?
Staying healthy.
Yep.
Food and cooking, really thinking about every meal and what you're doing and not trying to be boring about it, like diversifying your cuisine because you're making every meal. Toilet paper as a priority. Making sure that loved ones, friends, and colleagues are doing well. That's been a priority. Connecting with people more frequently now than before, maybe, not taking that for granted, and participating in design events like these, trying to connect, as well as, reading and researching on my own and practicing my electric bass. That's
That's awesome. That's very cool. Yeah, that's awesome. Well, you also maybe you can do a baseline throughout the webinar afterwards. We can add it in post.
Maybe you don't want that.
Yeah. Rebekah, how about you? How have your priorities shifted as a design educator?
I mean, I think similar to Tyler, as an educator, our priorities have shifted to, of course, our learning objectives are critical and important, but most important in this moment in time is making sure that the health and well-being of our students is at the forefront of our mind, that we're constantly touching base and making sure that they're okay, that their mental health is okay, that that we're open and listening to them, and that we're here to talk through and get them through the hurdles. So, I mean, of course, that's what we do always, but it's the number one thing we start off each class or each conversation with is how's everyone doing? How can we help you? So that's my first priority, of course, is the health and well-being of my students, and in correlation myself as well. And I think it's all similar to John. This has given us an opportunity and some time to maybe reprioritize, some of the things in our life. I've spent the last 6 years really focusing on my work, and this has given me a little bit of a breather to maybe reassess some of my priorities towards my own personal health as well.
That's fantastic. I'm really glad to hear that. Meghan, how are you doing? How are you kind of shifting your priorities?
Yeah, well, and I think I'll just build off the theme of people. I think we've really been focused on people in terms of our teams, in terms of our talent around our organization, in terms of our clients, and really starting there at that very human level. I think we're all sort of like hungry for that right now. And I think sort of framing it in two ways. One is, or maybe three ways. One is sort of to say, hey, we've got, we can't just like throw our strategic goals out the window, right? Like they're still there, they're still important, but then sort of acknowledging the presence of the situation and focusing on the now, focusing on that business continuity for our organization, and then also focusing on like how we plan for this new future, right? How we, and for a very uncertain future in that way that, in some ways I think there's a general sense like this will go back to normal, but in a very different way, and normal is going to, again, sort of be the new normal. So I think that's, we're sort of, it's different frames of reference, I think, than we used to have.
Yeah, that's interesting to hear. So hearing the word people a lot is making me think of one of our challenges / opportunities right now from IIDA is community. So how are the four of you creating or maintaining community, whether that's with your students or with your peers at Gensler? How are you all doing that? John, I'll start with you.
Community, that's, as I said, I think it's been about trying to reach out to people and do this kind of a thing, where before it might be an email or it might be a phone call or text message. And it's still that, but now it's more like, let's see each other because this is such a strange place for us to be right now, that having that connection is really important. And I'm obviously, we're all grateful to have this possibility of working with our students and being able to see them. It's not easy, I think, particularly for studios, and also for a design studio like Gensler or any kind of a studio. It's a challenge to have to work this way, particularly when you want to do things that you want to sketch, you want to pin things up, you want to build models, you want to look at those models, you want to see the projects from that more kind of holistic point of view. And so I think we're still learning. I think I'm certainly still learning about this and what this means and what the outcome will be as well, right? And we don't even know what this is going to result in at the end of several weeks of teaching this way. But like everything else, I think it's giving us a good experience, and we'll be better prepared the next time.
Meghan, how are you staying connected with your team at Gensler? How are you keeping that sense of community? I think that studio point that John brought up is really valid for all four of you.
Mm-hmm.
What are you doing to address that?
Yeah, no, I mean, it was really interesting when we first, I think on March 13th was when we shifted to a working from home situation. And, you know, there were a lot of emails right off the bat just to say, hey, you know, everyone recognizes that this is a new reality and we're going to be communicating in different ways. And some of it's not going to go very well and some of it will be great and we'll discover new things about that. And so I think we sort of put into place, you know, at sort of a studio level, just some ground rules, right? To sort of try and be present, but also try and be patient, knowing that, you know, many people are struggling with different personal situations, whether you're living alone, whether you're old, whether you're young, whether you're a parent. I mean, pretty much this is hard for everybody, but just in different ways. And so really recognizing that, when we were working in the office, we generally had a check-in every Mondays, and now, you know, we have these little kind of coffee talks throughout the week that are more casual. And I think as leadership of the firm, we're very much just present. We actually, our co-CEOs have been doing a number of video broadcasts as well, which is pretty funny because my kids were like literally like totally blown away that someone could, you know, be on a video like talking to you on your computer. So I mean, I think it's things like that where we're utilizing an infrastructure that was already in place to some degree, but now that's really amplified.
That's awesome to hear. Tyler, I'm thinking of you specifically when I think about community and staying connected with people. What are you doing as a graduating senior to stay with your peers, to get your work done? I'm sure you've got group projects you're still doing. What's the experience like for you?
Similar to what John was saying, like some of the things that were like quick back and forth text before are now like, hey, let's FaceTime. And even that little bit is like just like a much needed, like, let's figure some problem out we can't figure out together and laugh at the same time and see each other has been like so much better than just an email or a text. I know lots of people are doing their own little happy hours or like game nights that are virtual and different ways like that to use technology without being all business all the time.
That's great. Rebekah, what technology or tools are you all using right now as an educator to kind of keep that student experience relatively the same? I mean, is there anything you're able to do to keep your studios resembling what they were before this?
Well, I think fortunately we've had, you know, there's a lot of tools that are already integrated into the curriculum, whether it's a Carmen or a Blackboard or something like that, sort of allows us to have a digital framework to help structure our courses and to provide digital access for our students, as well as like Dropbox. We have Buckeye Box for ourselves. So we have that ability to kind of leverage those. You know, I think what's been new is the Zoom classroom and having these virtual desk crits where we can share each other's screens. It doesn't do quite the same that you would have when you're in person, but it's being effective for the time being. But there's been other strategies I've been using over the years. So I think fortunately, for educators that haven't used technology in the classroom before, this is a good opportunity to revisit and rethink about their classes and integrate other technologies into their course structure or ways in which to connect beyond the classroom. For myself, many years ago, I was charged with taking my materials and methods class that I'm teaching currently to an online curriculum at another school. And so from that experience back in 2008-9, I learned which aspects were really effective and have brought those into my classroom. And one of those was a discussion board sort of blog style where I have students take pictures. It's a photojournal kind of thing. And so students use that as a way to have discourse beyond the classroom. So I've used that in all of my technical classes, and it's been a really effective tool. Hopefully Tyler agrees. Effective tool in some of the technical classes, but we've been able to use that method in other classes, which I think has been really helpful. I think we also use GroupMe. So for every class I teach, I have a GroupMe, and that's been really helpful because it already created a community where people can ask questions openly, honestly, authentically, and it's an easy way to communicate without it being a text, and it's quick. So I think there's other ways that we can use that, or even Instagram. Again, before we went live, I think we were talking about authenticity and sort of transparency and getting the snapshot into real life. And I think that fosters a stronger human connection between students and professors or professionals and each other. And using our Instagram account, I think, helps make that stronger connection. So you still feel a sense of connectivity and community through some of these technologies.
Yeah, that's really, really helpful to hear. I agree with you. I think that forcing ourselves to lean into some of the authenticity that this moment is forcing us into is a really strong idea. In that same vein, I'm also thinking a lot about empathy and expectations. And so I'm kind of wondering, for the four of you, how are you managing expectations as either a student, an educator, or a professional? And maybe how are you using empathy as a part of that expectation management? Meghan, I'll start with you.
Yeah, you know, one thing I just wanted to add on really quickly to what Rebekah was saying. One thing that's been really cool is, you know, we've, in a way, we're not limited by location anymore. And we've found some instances, whether it's like, you know, visioning sessions or stakeholder engagement, where we have an ability to include more people who may not have been able to travel for, you know, for a specific meeting. And it also sort of like puts everybody on a level playing field. Like, I think, you know, the dynamic that you often have of someone who's like calling into a meeting where like half the meeting is in the room together, and that person is calling in, it's a little bit of a, you know, there's a hierarchy to that, right? And that hierarchy no longer exists with this new interface that we're all experiencing. And I think there's an interesting opportunity in both of those pieces. Really quickly on the expectations and empathy side, I think, you know, from a client standpoint, where we have really started is just, you know, being proactive, like being overly communicative, so that there's not a question of interpretation, or because you can't sort of like get past those because you don't have the benefit of being together in person. So really being careful about sort of how you're communicating, and being sort of ahead of you know, where things might be going within a project. And I think empathy-wise, you know, as we said, I think earlier, just like starting out any communication that you have with just kind of saying, how are things going? What's going on? And I think that really sort of puts people on common ground to begin with, just as a human interaction thing. But I think especially in this heightened time, it's, you know, it's super important and a great sort of baseline behavior.
That's really, really helpful to hear. John, how are you helping to manage the expectations of your students? How are you keeping them kind of in charge of their projects and engaged with the curriculum, while also being potentially flexible with what they're capable of, or how they can show up?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. I think a lot of it's still in play. You know, I think that I've rethought their final project, and we, after having presented it to them, we've kind of rethought it. So that there's as much research and design thinking as there is design. I think that, given our circumstances and not being able to do everything that we would have done previously, the value is in maybe doing a little bit more research than they might have done before. And so that's where I'm leaning towards that a bit more. And that there's a lot of value in the exploration of ideas that also address our current condition. So the changes I've made to their final project is to address where we are, and to think about the post-pandemic spacescape and what that means. Mm-hmm. And I think that this kind of thinking would apply to almost any design problem that they'll have. I mean, that's what we do as designers, right? We react to things, we problem solve, and here we are in this incredibly strange world right now, and we're perfectly poised in what we do and how we think to move ahead, and to think ahead, and to think how we can redefine what space means in the future, perhaps, you know. So now's a good time to kind of experiment and start.
That's really, really helpful. Tyler, I know we've got some students watching this, and I know many of them are also graduating. So what are you doing personally on an individual level to kind of help with your own expectations of what maybe this summer or this May even would have looked like and how that's now different?
It's definitely been like a process of accepting this reality that we're in now. I mean, lots of graduating seniors have been looking forward to things like senior showcases and of course graduation and sharing in their achievements with friends and family and with professionals even. So it took me a couple weeks to, you know, finally be like, this is what it is. You just have to accept that. And it kind of can be unmotivating, but at the same time, knowing that eventually like all of this will be over eventually, and like now's the time to really like work on yourself and work on maybe things that you didn't have time to do before, to just keep bettering yourself. So for me, my expectations haven't really changed, just maybe like the final like outcome of them or like the way they happen might change.
That's helpful. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's really, really helpful to hear. I want to pivot real quick. We've done a couple of these webinars now. And,
Ryan, do you mind if I answer the question?
I don't mind at all, please.
For me, out of all the questions we kind of talked about prior, this was the one that really hit home the most. Okay. And I think this question for our department has been at the forefront of every discussion that we've been having and at the forefront of every conversation I've been having with the students. And I think the understanding about expectations really starts with empathy. And there's a lot of factors that are going into what our students are going through right now that I might not have thought about until we started talking about these issues. You know, there are obstacles like being displaced. You know, some of our students have had to move out of the dorms and go back home to their parents. And of course, that causes a whole other set of obstacles that increases their responsibility to their parents or to their home. Some of our students have gone back to their home country. So now we're facing, not only are they not in the same city as us or in the same building as us, they're, you know, 12 hours or 16 hours away, and that's changing things entirely. So I think that the pandemic has really caused a lot of other hurdles that we need to be aware of. And not only this idea of displacement, but also when you remove, you know, we're a public institution. And so when you remove students from our public facilities, you also have to be cognizant that not all students have the same access to computers and internet and technology that they would have had on campus. So that's really had to make us rethink some of that so that we can provide equity amongst all of our students. And students are struggling with other things like, you know, I think it's 15% of students last year at Ohio State reported that they were food insecure on campus. And so when you take students and now they're not doing their internship and they're not working their part-time job, you're also adding in these extra stressors of how are they paying rent if they don't live with their parents? How are they getting food if they don't have food in the dorms or have access to the on-campus food bank? I mean, so there are a lot of other compounding factors that we just have to be cognizant of. So I think the gist is it has to start with empathy and really understand the life that our students are walking and how we can be the most flexible to provide them, you know, the opportunity to still meet their learning objectives. And maybe that means having to shift some of the curriculum into next fall or next spring where we can pick up the pieces later for them what they can't get this year. But I think that there's a lot of much bigger scope of factors that are impacting their daily lives.
Yeah.
Thank you for interrupting me to say all that. I really, really appreciate it. That's super, super helpful to hear. I'm seeing the chat box ring up with people agreeing with all of that. In that vein, and to pivot only maybe a little bit, again, we've done a handful of these webinars now, and we see questions come in from professionals, manufacturers, showroom managers, those folks, and they want to know how to help. What can they do? How can they show up? What can they contribute? So I'll start with John on that. What can the profession be doing for educators and students right now that would leave the greatest impact?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I mean, everybody, we're all in this kind of together now. and trying to figure it out. But it seems to me that firms must try and consider how to engage graduates or interns and allow them to do something, paid or unpaid, provide them an experience of some type, so that they can learn and grow, and they'll be better prepared for their eventual employment. It's got to be something. I think there's a way to do it. I mean, there's a lot of rules and regulations around some of these things with internships, but somehow we're in a new world here, right? We're in a new place. And in that new place, in order for us to be able to move forward effectively, I think there's got to be a new model that we've got to try. It's based on the old model, but it's like, let's just get people involved, give them a chance. If it's working remotely, but they're still involved, I mean, it's really looking at a whole new way of doing things, I guess. But we have to be open to it, there's a lot of great people who are graduating and we don't want to leave them hanging out there,
Yeah, that's helpful to hear. Meghan, I don't know how in touch you might be with how Gensler is handling that, even just locally at your office, but what does the internship conversation look like right now for you all?
Well, I'll take a different angle first, and then I can talk about the internship piece. I would say, I think the opportunity for the design industry here is to kind of really rethink how we're able to collaborate with one another, right, across different companies within our industry, across different organizations, public-private partnerships. Rebekah, I think your point about this situation really amplifying the disparity that exists. We as designers, and John, as you said, we're set up for agility, right? We're set up to help solve big, hairy problems. And I think what's been so cool to see are instances where we've seen like healthcare and hospitality team up, right, for hotels to house healthcare workers. And we have an opportunity as a design community that sees a cross-section of so many different pieces of our lives to really help these different entities collaborate and to collaborate with them. So I think that's that's just an opportunity there that it's something that we can't miss, right? I think from an internship standpoint, we have a formal internship program that includes a pretty robust research project. The formal internship program is in the summer, and then we also have co-op programs with different institutions in the fall and spring. I think that we are set up to make those virtual, and TBD as we continue forward towards the summer, but the summer internship applications are in, and the research projects, in addition to the project work that the students work on, those are done all virtually across offices and always have been. So that would not be a big change.
Good to know. Rebekah, what recommendations are you giving students right now who are looking for internships, jobs? What are you seeing or what are you sharing?
Ooh, I think that the internship is a little bit out of my wheelhouse. A lot of times I get local firms or companies kind of reaching out and saying, we want to be engaged with your studios, or we're looking for students. And, I haven't gotten as much of that right now. I'm trying to stay as connected to some of our local professionals as I can, as well as our students, and make sure, where are they with their internship process. But I think part of it as an educator is still trying to work with our professionals to integrate them into the courses that we're teaching still. So, one of the big things that usually happens at the end of every semester is like we have juries and we have professionals come in that review student projects. So how can we still maintain that valuable feedback and that relationship building opportunity between our students and our professionals in the final crit? I don't have all the answers for that, but one way that we've been doing it through the retail studio, and Tyler's in that class, is that we actually have set up throughout the entire semester. So it's allowed us to transition to what would have been our physical midterm and our final midterm with the jury that's usually in person. We've been doing conference call presentations, which is a great opportunity to bring professional practice that, as the professionals on the panel know, we often present to clients, where we send our decks ahead of time, and then we walk through the deck, and then we have Q&A. And so in the retail studio, it operates more like a firm. So we've been doing that all semester. So that's been a fluid transition. So maybe that's an opportunity for other educators looking for how to do final reviews to kind of reach out and say, can we do this as a method? And I think as far as other manufacturers and professionals, one of the things that's been really helpful are these webinars. A lot of manufacturers are hosting specific topic subject webinars on sustainability or on design thinking. Integrating those into our class has been really helpful because it's something that students can do and it maintains their attention, and we can have a discussion via the blog afterwards. And we've been using a lot of Interior Design Magazine's videos, whether it's from the Neocon showrooms or their firm tours, because we can't do firm tours this semester with our IIDA chapter. We can't go look at physical projects. So they've been a really good resource. The videos from the magazine have been very helpful.
That's really, really helpful to hear. Again, we're going to kind of, I think, keep talking about internships and employment just as we move forward every single day through this. So I'm trying to think of, there's so much about that we can't control, but what I'm thinking of is, are there skills, things that students or emerging design professionals can work on right now or practice, or what is going to make somebody really valuable right now as a designer? Yeah, Meghan, please.
So I was thinking about this because, I moved to Chicago in 2010, and although it wasn't in 2008, it was a little bit after the recession. There were still not a whole lot of jobs, and I got some really great advice from someone who said, you've got, who knows when you'll find a job, so why don't you just go ahead and enter a design competition? Just do something that is going to help you be better prepared to launch. And I did, and I actually ended up collaborating with a friend of mine in a different city, and we entered a design competition together, and that became a really great portfolio builder. And so I think it's things like that where it's being creative about where, this will end, right? This too shall pass, and being able to put yourself in a position where you're ready to launch even stronger, right? Focus on the long game. And I think if any of us in the profession have seen anything, it's that there are always ebbs and flows, right? This is a really big ebb and flow, but it will, it will also do the same thing that other sort of cycles do, right? And so being able to be prepared for that. And I think in terms of skills, in some ways, yes, there's sort of the tactical or concrete skills in terms of design software programs, but I think it's also, we talked about agility, growth mindset, critical thinking, communication, ability to collaborate, having social and emotional intelligence. I think all those things are that's what makes you sort of teachable, right? That's what makes you someone who can really kind of absorb and contribute and be an asset to an organization. And I think the more that you exhibit that, I would say from a professional standpoint, that's what I look for when we're hiring.
That's great. That's fantastic. Tyler, what skills are you leaning on right now to kind of get through to the end of graduation, and then also for your job search? Anything you can share with other students?
Definitely just utilizing different technology, shared drives and things like that have been helpful for collaborating with peer work and group partners, and just being flexible and understanding that things are going to take a little longer to collaborate virtually. Me and one of my partners wanted to work on a floor plan together via FaceTime, and we actually FaceTime together and did it, and it took 3 hours. So it just definitely adds extra time. So just kind of thinking about that when you're planning out your workload.
That's really helpful. Rebekah, any other kind of skills or teachable moments you're trying to pass along to your students right now to arm them for what's probably going to be a challenging summer?
Yeah, I think in addition to all the technology that we're sort of immersed in and sort of steeped in right now, this is a great opportunity to also kind of get back to some of the human skills. And when I mean that, more physical skills, this is a great opportunity to go out into nature and take a hike and sketch, or kind of reacquaint yourself with watercolor, or something that's going to help both serve your mental well-being and mindfulness at the same time as providing you a skill development that you might have forgotten from sophomore year rendering class, right, Tyler? Like, you can get your sketching classes back out. But I think it's a good opportunity to kind of build some of those other skills. Especially as students get further into the curriculum, they get deeper into technology, and we're all leaning into that now, but it's also a good time to kind of balance that. And maybe this is a good time. I keep seeing people doing virtual weaving classes, and, you know, other ways to kind of think about design as an extension and be creative as another outlet.
Yeah, that's very helpful to hear. I feel like now is such a unique opportunity to find those supplemental moments and those supplemental resources to kind of expand on what is the more traditional design curriculum. So John, is there anything you're tapping into right now to kind of help flesh out your students' experience that's maybe wouldn't have been in the wheelhouse prior to all of this?
Yeah, it's a good question. I just think that they're tethered to their technology now, and they're comfortable with technology. So it's not like the learning curve for them in technology is very different than it is for me, for example. Okay, so so they're adapting quite rapidly to it, I believe. You know, and so that's not the problem. I think it's idea of going in deep. You know, going in deep, doing some research. Really digging into ideas instead of just taking them more superficially and reacting to them because of time constraints that we often have in academia. You know, they've got a certain amount of time to get things done, and so they tend to be reactive to those things. And maybe now is an opportunity to go deep, you know, to really think about things, to explore things. And I totally agree with using, you know, hand sketching or rendering or going back to a more analog approach to doing things is great. You know, you have a little bit more time maybe to do that. And I think all of us will be more empathetic and more flexible about what this means in terms of their final projects, right? I mean, our expectations are not going to be the same as they would have been. There's a trauma that we're all experiencing right now, and we've got to acknowledge that, you know. And we know we're not totally on our game yet. So, you know, I think there's a flexibility, and I just like them to sort of really, part of what I've said for this last project in the studio is to come in with really innovative thinking, you know, stretch yourselves and go and think about ideas because of where we are. And I'll have a lot of flexibility with that kind of thinking, and we'll talk about it, and we'll get there, you know. So that's kind of where I've been.
Yeah, that is really helpful to hear. I think it's easy for us to talk so much about the challenges of right now, and it's very necessary to do that. That, like you said, there's real trauma happening. There are real barriers for certain groups of people, if not for a little bit for everybody. But in that vein, for opportunities, what else are we seeing as kind of a positive to come out of this? I think a deeper sense of empathy, a maybe more refined sense of flexibility. What else are we seeing as like kind of a positive coming out of this so far?
Communication.
Yeah.
A new way of communicating broadens our communication skills, perhaps.
Yeah, Megan, you mentioned earlier. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think one thing that's really interesting, and, you know, again, within the education design world, you know, about maybe like a decade ago when online learning became something that was, it was a new thing, right? Or as a thing that was increasingly becoming prevalent. And there were all these questions around, what's going to happen at the brick and mortar campus, and is physical space going to be something of the past? And, I think what this experience is showing us is that there are imperatives around place, right? And around human connection and around space and community. And the virtual world will always exist. And that's great. There are a lot of positives about that, but it doesn't replace what you get out of the physical, the world of physical interaction. And I think having that moment to really reflect on that and realize that, I think will kind of bring a renewed emphasis around that in great ways. And, I think, I referred earlier, I guess another positive is just this question around, kind of project-based or experiential learning. I mean, again, one of the big trends we were seeing was around active learning environments, and Rebekah and I were chatting about that earlier, and how do we sort of shift how do we sort of shift how we teach around the way people are really learning, and recognizing that there's not, there's sort of a myth around like the average learner, right? Like no one is an average learner. Everyone is sort of learning in different ways. We're sort of meeting students where they're at. And I think this is an opportunity to really tap into that, right? To kind of, again, learn from this experience as to how we can better connect the way people absorb information, the way people experience information, not just within the setting of the classroom, but that classroom setting is gone right now, right? We're all in a very different reality in terms of the settings that we're learning in. And I think that there's an opportunity there.
Yeah, I completely agree, Meghan, with the things that we were talking beforehand about the shift towards active learning and the future of learning environments really plays into this. And, it also has really made me think about the importance of studio culture. And while we can replace aspects in some ways through these digital technologies and these ways of connecting through Zoom, like we're doing right now, and having virtual desk crits, et cetera, nothing truly can replace the value of studio culture. About those spontaneous moments when you're sitting beside someone and you can bounce ideas off of each other, the ability for me to just walk up and check in and see something and react to it. You don't have the breadth of time to be able to do that in a Zoom 15-minute call, and you're starting to think about that next 15-minute call that you have with the next student, and you're trying to organize all those thoughts. Studio culture facilitates this open dialogue, and it's really important because it makes me think about many years ago, I think it was in 2002, the AIS wrote the Studio Culture White Paper, and I was part of the organization at the time, and it made me really think about the importance of process over product. And right now, similar to what John was saying about really diving in deep to the research or diving in deep to the project, when you're communicating with sharing back the product, even if it's a touch base for 15 minutes, you're showing what you've accomplished over the last week through the Zoom call. I'm not able to see the process. And again, that's what's really important about studio culture and the emphasis on the thinking and the learning and not just the outcome.
Really, really helpful to hear. We've gotten a question in that I think relates to a couple of the other questions we talked about prior to getting started. What is this summer going to potentially look like for students? What advice can we give them if an internship doesn't pan out? Should they be thinking about taking portions of the NCIDQ? Should they be looking at other summer courses or classes? Are universities going to consider doing that to kind of help students? What's in the works right now, Rebekah? What are you all working on?
Well, it was announced a few weeks ago, or maybe just a week ago. I seem to be losing track of the days and the time. But all of our campus classes will be going virtual throughout the summer. So Ohio State's already made that decision. I think many colleges are as well, just to make sure that we are staying in safe, healthy places. So I think this is a good opportunity that if students have the luxury and aren't graduating and they're not able to find an internship, that this is an opportunity for them to either do online classes while still being at home with their family. So I think that that's a great suggestion. I think your suggestion about NCIDQ, if students have accomplished enough in the curriculum to be able to take that IDFX exam right off the bat, that's a great opportunity to study for it and to do that as well. Yeah.
Excellent. John, anything to add that you're thinking about pointing your students to this summer?
Yeah, it's been on my mind because, as you might recall, I brought students to Chicago every year. I run a course that takes people to Neocon, and we tour Chicago, do architectural history tour, et cetera. And all of those courses are canceled. We have a lot of travel courses at Pratt. I'm sure other schools are as well, and those are gone now. So I'm actually proposing to teach a different course this summer. So I'm trying to contribute to what is going to be a vacuum or a void in the curriculum, right, for the summer, and give the students more opportunities perhaps by adding some courses. And I'm sure there'll be other faculty that'll do the same. Yeah, I think that we need to have a discussion, the community, the design community needs to have a general discussion about what we can do to provide some kind of internships for the students in some way, virtually or otherwise, and that's a big part of it. And from the students' point of view, I think that, you know, I always say that when I found this career, when I found this place, it's like falling in love, right? You fall in love because design is something that goes well beyond, you know, a typical career path. It's more all-encompassing. And I think that if students view it that way, there is so much that they can do. There's so many things that they can explore to enhance their education and become, you know, just more, educate themselves about design and go deeper than they can sometimes during the semester, because we've got them tethered to so many things that they have to do. They have some time to explore, and I would encourage them all to do that beyond what any structured kind of things that we can try and facilitate, to go outside of that.
And I think to something Meghan talked about, I think it was about competitions. You know, students might not be able to afford classes over the summer because that would be additional tuition, and then they'd have to apply for loans and things like that. So if they can't take classes through their regular institution, finding what competitions are out there, or finding those kinds of projects to be able to engage if they're not in an internship, to further advance their portfolio development over the summer on their own, so that they're not losing this time that's valuable to help them further develop in their career path.
Really, really helpful to hear. I really appreciate that. I think it's really tempting right now to just only wait this out, but I know, having been at IIDA for long enough, I know that the majority of designers are not waiters. They're not going to just kind of wait out this moment. They want to be actively engaged with this. I think that's great advice.
Yeah, I think one other thing I would add to that is one of the things that we've been seeing quite a bit, where we're actually working with an innovation center right now on their kind of new expansion space. And they were like, we're actually busier than ever because, you know, healthcare centers are depending on us to do 3D printing of masks and 3D printing of shields. And a lot of that is happening, whether it's through design firms, whether it's through just people who are interested in helping. And I think, you know, this is a time for service, and not just in an altruistic way. You learn a lot from that, right? And whether it's service through design or fabrication, or whether it's just, you know, kind of taking on a new experience, right? If that experience is not going to be in the form of an internship, like, what experiences can you create for yourself? Like, that is a design problem in and of itself, right? Because our experiences are limited virtually, but we have this great opportunity of the internet, right? So there are ways that we can search for that we couldn't, you know, 20 years ago. And, you know, I wonder if that's something that folks can build on, because I think in some ways it sort of taps into the things that you're intrinsically passionate about.
Right. And service beyond design, Meghan, too, like, as we think about, you know, the food banks right now are being overtaxed. There's, you know, so many shelters and places that need assistance. So this is a good opportunity to find, while still maintaining a healthy, you know, location and all the precautions. Is there ways that you can engage your local community to give back as well?
Yeah, that's really, really very, very good point. I was wondering if we could spend a little bit of time being looking forward. What is the impact of this going to be on the classroom of tomorrow? And I think we can look at that as educators, and then also, Meghan, with your design experience. What is the long-term impact of this going to be on what a classroom looks like and how it operates?
Well, I can just start it off really quickly. You know, Gensler is a research-based design firm, and so we have a number of research projects, and those are happening through the education practice area as well. And one of the multi-year studies that we've been working on is called the Education Engagement Index, and it essentially measures the impact of space on learning. And over the last 2 months or month, the team has actually pivoted a little bit in the development of an online survey tool to really have that be about learning from home. And so they're trying to measure not only, you know, kind of engagement in the classroom, but then how that shifts when you're learning from home and you're in this, you know, the space that you're in learning from home. And so we're actually beta-ing that. This is a little bit of a plug if anyone's interested in having us beta that with your students. We would love to, just to be able to have them take the survey. It's really easy. You can do it on your phone. But that's a tool that we're rolling out over the next 2 years, you know, in the long term, but we're at the beta stage right now. And I think, you know, in terms of how we, how things will change, again, you know, there's sort of the value of place that's still very present. But I do think, especially for the kind of more hands-on disciplines, whether that's in design, whether it's in art, whether it's in medicine, you know, this is certainly very illuminating in terms of the limitations of that, but also in terms of how we need, what's the workaround, right? And sometimes innovations come from that workaround. So I hope that that's something that I don't have an answer yet, but that's something that we start to explore is, you know, not just the learning pieces that happen that are pretty easy to do virtually, but the things that are a lot harder.
Really, really helpful to hear. Tyler, what are you thinking about the classroom of tomorrow? How do you think this is going to impact the students behind you coming forward, moving through their design curriculum?
I hope a lot more people are in studio when they can be in studio again, because I mean, I know I was in there a lot, and other like peers of mine spend a lot of time in the studio, and it really is just illuminating on how different your process is at home versus there, and like what kind of work you can accomplish, even if it's an individual project. Just like being around other thinkers and doers, it's just such a different mindset. So I would say in the future, I don't think these places are going to go away. I think people are going to crave them and want to be in environments like that to work. And so when we can again, I would just say use it to your advantage and your opportunity.
Awesome. John, what are you thinking? What are you thinking long-term from this?
Well, I mean, one thing are the tools that we're talking about and the means in which we deliver information and so on. That's, I think, one side of it. I think the other thing is that, and I sort of touched on it before, is that I think that we really have to approach all spatial typologies from the perspective that they can change, and when they do, how will those spaces adapt in order to function, to serve, and potentially enhance the lives of people who are inhabiting them. I really think it's some big questions are coming out of all of this that we need to address, and I think we need to address them in academia, and I think professionals need to address it as well, right? Like, how do things adapt in a crisis? You know, we've been slow through this whole process, as we know, and from the top down, right? And maybe, you know, as I said earlier, as design thinkers, we have an opportunity here to kind of be at the front of things and think about how spaces will change and they'll adapt so that our lives don't have to be so different when we have these times of crisis. And that's part of, I think, just the way we might approach the teaching process, right? Now, you know, from a bigger point of view, like you've been saying, or others have been saying, community. I really think it's a great opportunity to come together as a community. I know that Meghan said it earlier too, you know, cross collaboration, but also I know I saw something come up about manufacturers. Like in IIDA, we're perfectly poised here, I think, to bring people together, right? And maybe we need to create some new initiatives that are about like, what do we do for students now? Like, what do we do for the industry now? How do we all come together from design firms and manufacturers and educational institutions, all working together instead of sort of compartmentalized a little bit, you know? And that's what I think I would say from this new experience that I'm having, you know. That's
great. Rebekah, we've got a couple minutes left, but I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, I think just kind of recapping many of the things that everyone else has already said. I was having a conversation this morning with one of my studio project teams, and we were talking a lot about how much of a hurdle it is to kind of get up and running each day. And it goes back to some of the things Meghan was saying about our environmental factors that influence our human behaviors. And so, you know, those location cues. If I'm working in my bedroom, then I naturally am inclined to think that this is the place to relax and sleep. And so it's very challenging to get over that hurdle. Whereas if I'm in studio, surrounded by my peers, then I know it's work time and music is playing and I'm feeding off of their energy. And I think that it goes back to, again, that idea that studio culture is important. We have to understand the environmental design cues that give us those location cues on how we should behave as humans in our environments. But I think the classroom of the future, this has given us as education opportunity to experiment and if you hadn't done it previously, you're forced into looking at new ways of teaching and communicating the material. And what comes out of it is a value of extending learning beyond the classroom, and that we have an opportunity to engage and continue communicating with our students outside of the hour and 20 or 3 hours we have during the week, during the class itself, to get them to still think about these things. Because as we all know, as designers, we see the world through a design lens. We approach every problem as the lens of a designer would. So how do we start to get that mentality seeped into their everyday being? And by extending active learning beyond the classroom, as Meghan and I were talking before the webinar started, I think that's the future of design, of education in general, is extending active learning beyond the classroom. It's something we're studying at Ohio State and in one of my studios, and you know, researchers are doing this. And so I think as educators, we need to start thinking about how do we bring the positives of this in order to make a balanced curriculum and classroom that really connects more tangibly with our digital native students.
Awesome. That's fantastic. I think that's a great note to wrap this up on. I want to thank the four of you so much for taking a part of this. I really, really appreciate it. Again, we can't do any kind of programming like this without the expertise of folks like yourselves. So thank you all so much. Again, this was a CEU, so we've got that information up on the screen for you, so feel free to utilize that. We will be sending out this webinar once we've got it kind of downloaded and saved, so it'll be available on our website. We're doing these every Thursday. We've got a great discussion planned for you next Thursday that I'm really excited about, that I think will answer some additional questions about the internship search and job search and all of that. If you need anything, anybody out there right now, please contact us. We want to be reflective and responsive to the moment all of you are in. So we want to help you and provide resources and provide tools. We're going to work on getting a lot more of these questions answered in other formats, so stay tuned. Thank you also so much. We really appreciate it. Cheers and have a great rest of your week.
Thanks. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Ryan.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.